From 1978 to 1981, Wichita resident Ruth Finley was brutally tormented, stalked, and attacked by a fiend known only as the Wichita Poet. Today, part 2 of the Wichita Poet, and today's edition of Sinister Kansas History. To recap, starting in 1978, Wichita resident Ruth Finley had been brutally stalked by an individual that police could never identify. Through a series of investigations, through phone taps, security camera footage, and tracing back mail, the Wichita police were no closer to catching the culprit in 1981. Wichita Chief Detective Richard LeMunyon was spurred to action when the Wichita Poet sent a letter to him claiming that his wife would be his next victim. After spending days poring over all the information, LeMunyon was ready to make his charge because he knew who the Wichita Poet was. After identifying his suspect, Detective LeMunyon made sure that he surveilled and found who his culprit was. On September 14th of 1981, he brung in Ed Finley, the husband of Ruth Finley, with shocking evidence. LeMunyon asked Ed if he had ever seen 3 letters that they had pulled from a mailbox. One letter was a bill from the Finley family to J.C. Penney. The other was another bill sent to the Kansas Gas Company. The third letter was sent by the Wichita Poet. The pictures taken by the surveillance crew showed that Ruth Finley herself had mailed the letters, and that she was the Wichita Poet. Ruth Finley, when confronted with the information, admitted that she was stalking herself. When Ruth Finley was growing up, she was assaulted and attacked by a neighbor. As she was sitting that night in 1978, waiting to hear back from her husband, listening to news reports of the BTK killer and his spree going throughout Wichita, she had a psychotic break where she created the identity of the Wichita Poet in order to cope with the trauma that was going on around her and the unresolved trauma from when she was a child. After going through several years of therapy, Ruth Finley was able to go back and live an active, normal life. She then began advocating for other victims of trauma and abuse and became a nationally known figure, sharing her story and how she failed to cope with it and how that resulted in the manifestation of the Wichita Poet. And that's going to be it for today's edition of Sinister Kansas History.